A starving German shepherd staggered through the snow and looked straight into the officer's eyes, as if begging, "Please, can I eat with you?" What happened next stunned everyone watching and became the story that melted hearts around the world. Snow drifted down in slow, delicate flakes, frosting the sidewalks and the tops of parked cars along Main Street. Officer James Carter rubbed his gloved hands together as he stepped out of his patrol car, his breath clouding in the frigid evening air. The end of his shift couldn't come soon enough. He was tired, chilled to the bone, and craving a hot meal, something to thaw the numbness in his fingers and maybe in his heart. He crossed the street to a small cafe that kept a few tables outside, even in winter. A heater glowed above one corner, spreading a pocket of warmth that drew him like a magnet. He took a seat, nodding politely at the waitress who brought him a cup of coffee. As he settled in, he let his gaze drift over the quiet block. Most shops had closed hours ago, leaving the street dark except for the twinkle of holiday lights. That's when he noticed movement near a lamppost. At first, he thought it was just the wind stirring some trash, but then a shape emerged, a dog. It was a German shepherd, ribs visible even through its thick fur. The animal moved with a weary caution, sniffing at empty wrappers, its head drooping lower each time it failed to find food. James felt an ache behind his sternum, a pang he hadn't expected. He watched as the dog paused, glancing up and down the sidewalk as if making sure no one would chase it away. Then it lifted its head, eyes searching, until they landed on him. For a moment, man and dog simply studied each other, the cold forgotten. The dog took a tentative step forward, its paws sinking into the fresh snow. James could see now just how thin it was, each rib etched like a shadow against its coat. The German shepherd's fur was patchy along its back, and a scar cut across one ear. It had clearly been out here far too long. A young couple leaving the cafe glanced over and wrinkled their noses. "Shoo!" the woman called sharply, waving her hand. The dog flinched but didn't retreat. Instead, it lowered its head and looked back at James, eyes dark and imploring. He'd seen that look before, years ago, on rescue calls and in the aftermath of storms. It was the silent plea of a creature who had nothing left to lose. James shifted in his chair, unsure whether to call animal control or simply look away. But he couldn't. He watched the dog's hesitant steps, each one closer to the table. When it reached the edge of the patio, it stopped again, as if gathering courage. Snowflakes clung to its muzzle and lashes, melting slowly in the cold. Their eyes met again, and in that quiet instant, the noise of the street seemed to fade. The German shepherd lifted its gaze to the plate of steaming fried chicken in front of him, then back to his face. It didn't bark or whine. It didn't beg in the usual way. It just stood there, silent, its eyes wide and searching, as if to ask a single, simple question. "Can I eat with you?" James swallowed hard. He knew he should look away, pretend he hadn't seen. But something about that look rooted him to the spot. James drew a slow breath, feeling something shift inside him. Some old wall he hadn't realized was still standing. He reached for the plate, the warmth of the ceramic a small comfort against the chill. Gently, he tore off a piece of chicken and set it on the ground, just past the edge of the table's shadow. The German shepherd's ears twitched, but it didn't lunge. Instead, it crept forward, one paw at a time, every muscle tense as if expecting to be struck or chased away. When it finally reached the morsel, it lowered its head and took the meat between its teeth. For a moment, it simply held the food, as though it couldn't believe it was real. Then it swallowed and looked up, meeting James's eyes again. "Easy, boy," James murmured, his voice softer than he'd heard it in months. "It's all right. No one's going to hurt you." He tore off another piece and set it closer. This time, the dog stepped up without hesitation. Someone across the street paused to watch, a hand drifting to their phone to take a picture. But James didn't care about the stares. He placed the third piece on an empty chair across from his own, then patted the seat. The dog blinked, as if puzzled by this invitation. Slowly, carefully, it raised itself onto the chair. Its paws shook from hunger and cold, but when it finally sat, something in its expression changed. For the first time since he'd spotted it, the dog lifted its head, ears perked, as though it felt safe. James offered the next piece of chicken, by hand, and the dog accepted it without fear that a hush had settled over the sidewalk cafe. People passing by slowed their steps to watch the strange sight. A uniformed officer sharing his dinner with a ragged German shepherd. Phones came out, snapping photos that would soon travel far beyond this little block. But James barely noticed this. He set another piece of chicken on the table. A woman approached, her breath rising in quick puffs in the freezing air. She wore a thick parka and a knit hat pulled low over her forehead. A bright orange badge marked her as part of the local animal rescue. She paused, her eyes going wide when she saw the dog perched politely in the chair. "Excuse me," she said gently, her voice edged with awe. I think that's Max." James turned, frowning. "You know him?" She nodded, pulling her gloves off to reveal trembling hands. "He went missing last spring when his owner passed away. We searched everywhere, put up posters, checked every shelter. No one ever saw him again." She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening. "He must have been surviving out here alone all this time." The German shepherd looked over at her, ears flicking at the sound of his name. For a moment, he seemed to recognize her, but he didn't move from his seat. Instead, he glanced back at James, as if to say he'd made his choice. James felt something tighten in his throat. He reached out and stroked the dog's neck, feeling the brittle fur under his palm. "How old is he?" he asked quietly. "7." She said, voice soft. "He's a good dog. He just needed someone to notice." James nodded slowly, realizing he couldn't turn away now. James let his hand rest on the dog's back, feeling the shallow rise and fall of each breath. Around them, the street had brightened with the glow of shop windows and passing headlights. But all he could see was this animal, this survivor, who had somehow found the strength to trust again. He looked up at the rescue worker. "Does he have anywhere to go tonight?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the ground. "We can take him to the shelter, but it's overcrowded right now. He'd probably be in a kennel alone." James shook his head before she'd even finished. "No," he said firmly. "He's not going back out there." He stood, dropping a few bills on the table to pay for the meal. The dog watched his every move, those dark eyes bright with a fragile hope that made James's chest ache. He took a deep breath, then crouched so they were eye to eye. "You've been alone long enough," he murmured. "Come on, buddy. Let's go home." The dog slid off the chair, paws crunching into the snow. As James started toward his patrol car, the German shepherd fell into step beside him without hesitation. They walked together past the curious onlookers, past the flashes of cameras and the hushed words that would become tomorrow's headlines. That night, a photo of the officer and the dog went viral, an image of quiet compassion in a world that often forgot how much it mattered. Thousands shared the story, pledging to adopt animals who waited for someone to care. But for James, none of that mattered as much as the simple moment when he opened the car door. The dog climbed inside, curled up on the seat, and finally closed his eyes.